Welcome, Caity, and thank you for being willing to get on a couple minutes early. Well, it's only a minute early now, but just to let you know, my name is Curran Hamilton. I'm going to be the facilitator today. And before I let you go off, I'm just going to give you a tiny bit of the format. So you're going to have 25 minutes, 5 of which we want you to use as an intro to tell us your name and a little bit about yourself, and then also tell us a little bit about the position that you're running for. And then the rest of the intro, you can do whatever you want to. And then we have 20 minutes of question and answer, and we have a variety of questions from our Sunrise members. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you get to it. You'll get a couple extra seconds. I will be somewhat strict on the time, so I'll let you know. I'll step in and say, hey, you're done with your 5 minutes.
Like a buzzer.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
But for now, it's all yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm really happy to be here, or happy to be in my living room anyway, and talking to you. My name is Caity Maple, and I'm running for Sacramento City Council District 5. And I love my neighborhood, I love my city, but I have been feeling for the last several years as an organizer, as someone who's been involved in homelessness and working on several different issues in the city of Sacramento, that often our leadership does not prioritize the people who need it most, and really focuses on, in fact, developers, which is one of the key donators to most of the city council members that are currently on there, with the exception of a couple now that I'm excited about, and corporations. And that really shows in the decisions that they make. And so for me, I ran away from home when I was 16 years old. I put myself through school. I worked in the service industry for 8 years, waitressing, bartending, everything under the sun. And I was very housing insecure. I often slept in parking lots and really struggled. I was in poverty for many years. I eventually graduated from UC Davis and went on to work in policy, and later for the cannabis industry, which is what I do now. I do consulting for them. And my frustration really took, the moment I decided to run was at the beginning of the pandemic, when we started a nonprofit called Sac Soup, or Solidarity of Unhoused People, to represent and help provide mutual aid to unhoused neighbors in Sacramento who were not able to access food and other services that were previously available. And I remember distinctly, I would always show up at city council meetings on Zoom, and my council member, when asked if we could turn empty city buildings that no one was using into housing and shelter for folks who were on the street, his response was, whoa, that's not fair. We should definitely talk to the developers first and give them an opportunity to respond. And I just couldn't believe that. And that was the moment that I said, you know what, I'm going to put my hat in the ring, because I think that we need someone to show up who's going to be for the people. And that includes our neighbors on the streets who don't have anything. So that background for me, coming from poverty, having these experiences, growing up on public assistance, and just feeling frustrated by that lack of leadership. I'm running to be a voice of change. I'm running to be someone who puts people over profit, and that prioritizes the urgency that we need around a lot of these issues, including climate change, including helping people who are experiencing poverty, and creating systems that work better for people, our public transportation systems, and so on. So I'll also be, if elected, I'll be the youngest person on the council. I'm currently in student loan debt, like a lot of people that I know, and probably a lot of you. And I think it's really important to have somebody who comes from that background and has those experiences, because it helps shape what we do for policy. So that's what I'm running. That's what I'm here to do. And I'm really happy to answer questions. And I don't know if I used up my whole time, but happy to be here.
You still have 3 minutes if you want to use it, or we can jump right into the questions. We do have a lot of questions. We probably won't get through all of them.
Okay, well, I would love to answer questions.
Okay, excellent. So let me make sure I am on the right set of questions for you here. Give me one moment. Okay. Actually, I think in the intro section, can you explain a little bit more about the position you're running for and its responsibilities for those of us who are less informed about what a city councilor can do?
Sure. So it's City of Sacramento. As a city council member, you'll be in charge of one of 8 people who are in charge of developing policy for the city. So that's everything from whether or not the streets are paved and you have stop signs in place, to how the nearly $1 billion budget is spent. And that includes city programs related to services, that includes the shelters that we're putting up for homeless, that includes business loans. So it's basically everything that's within the jurisdiction of the city of Sacramento. Our tree canopy that's decided, but the city council also works closely with other agencies. So for example, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or SMUD, which does our utilities here, we work closely with them and coordinate. Same thing with the County of Sacramento. They are more in charge of health and human services. The city does do some of that, but that's not their primary responsibility. So I would be representing my district, District 5. I live in Oak Park, but the district also covers Hollywood Park. It covers parts of the South area, Mangum Park, Golf Course Terrace Estates, and some parts of the South area. So I would be representing the people in that district on the council for any issues that they may have related to city services. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what is about the size in terms of population of that district?
So that's with redistricting just completed in December, and the new district has close to 65,000 people.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so to the first of our more specific questions for you, what's your vision for a municipal level Green New Deal, which is a big thing here in Sunrise, right? What role do you think your office can play in achieving that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one, I'll say, I always tell everyone that I interview with that I'm not an expert. And so I always look to people as well. So that's a big part of why I put on my questionnaire as well, that I look to have advisors on these issues with me at all times and any policy decision related, because I may not know everything, not coming from a background working in this. But my vision is we have thousands of jobs in the city of Sacramento, and really doing an analysis to figure out, are any of those jobs that we currently have connected to fossil fuels? Are they connected to things that are not good for the environment? And how can we transfer those over? I think of like our bus fleets, for example. I think of some of like how many of our city offices and departments are using vehicles. Are those electric? So just focusing on the things that are right in front of us. And then also being a voice for what's happening at a state level and at a national level. So as a council member, having myself and my colleagues on the council pass a Green New Deal resolution that sends a signal directly to the state and sends a signal directly to the federal government that's something that we're focused on, because not everything we're going to be able to do at a city level. But I'm really interested in doing an analysis or an audit of what the city is currently doing and how we can make those changes, because I think you have to start from the bottom up.
Fantastic. Great. If you could reallocate the city budget, how would you shift spending priorities?
That's a good question. So one of the things, is this just related to climate change or just in general?
I think I have some follow-up questions more specifically, but for now you can just go broad.
Yeah, so one of the things that we were looking into and that was recently passed was the electrification ordinance. So taking a look at how we can shift parts of the budget that are focused on gas and on oil and shift that towards electrification. Also talked about what we're spending in terms of our transportation systems, cars. I'm also really focused on not just on the environment, but how we're allocating our public safety dollars. I would love to see a shift in what we're spending on law enforcement to make sure that we're also allocating funds for mental health, that we're allocating funds for homelessness, and we're sending out the right people to go to those types of calls. That's a big focus for me. And the other thing is I believe in community-based budgeting. So making sure that we're always going to the community and figuring out what they need. Because I don't ever want to assume that what I believe is right is what the community wants. And I think that for many, many years, in Sacramento and a lot of other cities, what they do is people get elected and they say, you know what, this is what I think, and that's what budget gets passed. I would love to see more community-based budgeting where we go and we survey constituents. It's an ongoing thing that happens on a yearly basis. So we're making sure our priorities are always matching up.
Great, and you kind of already addressed this in some of your public safety comments there, but would you make it a priority to reduce or stop funding for sweeps on unhomed encampments?
100%. I think that what's happening on the streets is immoral. And I've been very outspoken about that. And it's part of the reason why I think that there's some folks that in elected positions who may not always like me, but I believe that it doesn't matter who likes me or not. What matters is people's lives. Sweeps literally lead to deaths. We've seen it on the streets. And so I do outreach work on a daily basis with folks who are unhoused on the streets, and it's traumatizing. And it also doesn't make any sense. It's not a good use of resources. What's happening is people get constantly moved around. There's nowhere that they can legally go. They're criminalized, and it makes it harder for them to find jobs. It makes it harder for them to find housing. It makes it harder for them to be treated for any medical conditions that they may have. And it serves absolutely no purpose other than to placate some folks who might not want to see someone in their neighborhood.
And another follow-up to that same public safety thread, can you commit to opposing increases to the police department's current budget allocation?
Yes.
Right. A simple
Something
answer.
I've also been outspoken about. I will not be seeking any law enforcement, police union money, anything like that. I think that we have the largest law enforcement budget that we've had ever, and it still never seems to be enough. And that's why I go back to, how can we make sure that we're spending the dollars that we do have wisely? Are we actually sending out the right people to the calls? Or are we continuing to traumatize people by sending out people with guns and badges to places where it really should be maybe a social worker or someone else? So really interested in that. And I think that we spend more than enough right now.
Excellent to hear. The next one is a little bit more in the weeds, so we'll see how this goes for both you and me. So before we proceed, are you familiar with the recommendations of the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change?
I'll be honest, I haven't read that through.
Okay. In 2020, the MCCC passed a set of recommendations to get the city to carbon neutral by 2040. And it's now on the city council to pass specific ordinances to instruct staff to work towards achieving those reductions. So down to the question part of this, the city's current operations timeline of emissions reductions is 2045. And it's consistent with the Sacramento or the state of California's minimum requirement for cities across California. Do you think it's ambitious enough, that timeline? And if elected, how would you set the city's planning's trajectory differently?
That's a good question. Well, I don't think that even 2030 is fast enough. As we've looked around what's happening in the world, we have flooding, we have fires that are killing people, we have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have catastrophic climate events that are happening all around us. And, you know, as someone, I want to have a future. I want future generations to have a future. I want people to be able to live lives. And I think where they are not in constant fear of their safety, of their ability to be homed or to have a job. And so for me, I think that we need to be moving towards a faster target at all costs. And that needs to be happening from the federal level to the state level to the local level. And so I would be interested in finding out how we can set that date sooner. I'm not, because I believe that it's a collaboration between different agencies as well. It's not just the city of Sacramento, but I could be wrong. So I'd be very interested in seeing how we can work together with the city council and the mayor's office to set that sooner. I don't have any specific recommendations, but I do look forward to learning more about it.
Yeah, I can't answer your question there either about whether or not it's a collaboration.
I just try to be as honest as possible, because I feel like when you try to, I'm not a climate scientist or an expert, but I think it's really important to rely on people who are, and have those people a part of the conversation, which I think it's really important to have folks that are a part of your organization that are at the table and ensuring that we're having constant conversations. So.
Excellent, excellent. And so again, this might be too into the weeds for you, and I think it's completely valid to rely on some expert voices here. Of the various ways to reduce emissions, what do you think should be the priority for the city to make meaningful progress?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? I was reading the chat. I apologize.
Absolutely, yeah, not a problem. Of the various ways to reduce emissions, which do you think should be the priority for the city to make meaningful progress?
So I think where the city has a lot of influence is how we design, right? So how we're designing our streets, how we're designing our neighborhoods, where we're prioritizing projects. I was just talking to a friend. I live in Oak Park. I was walking over the freeway to go to Curtis Park, and him and I were having a discussion about how it's like a tale of two different neighborhoods of how they've been impacted by the creation of this freeway system through Sacramento, and how that's affected especially my neighborhood in Oak Park and people who live there. And so I think we need to be really conscious about how much space we're giving for roads, how much space we're giving to parking, and really building up our public infrastructure system for our public transportation infrastructure. Like right now, you have good luck trying to get on public transportation to get to the airport and back. Good luck on getting to public transportation if you live in South Sacramento and you work in the city core. You know, we literally force people to drive because there's no other reasonable way to get to work or to drop your kids off at school or daycare, whatever that may be. And so I think our focus should be on really building up public transportation in a way that people can actually use and want to use. And we can do that by using funds that are coming into us right now. I mean, Sacramento is getting, you know, a good chunk of change from the American Rescue Plan Act at the federal level. But I think that the city should be talking right now. How can we utilize those funds for public transportation? How can we utilize those funds to redesign our roads to discourage people from driving and discourage people from parking? I know that when it's really hard to park in downtown, what do? You ride a scooter or you grab, you know, an alternative form of transportation. So I think we need to be encouraging things like that at the city level, and that will shift over time.
Really great to hear. As someone who has trouble getting all the way to the other end of the city for my job, I can appreciate some public transportation at the very least. If you've already talked a little bit about this and how it's one of your main focuses, but if you could accomplish one thing, what would you do to protect our most vulnerable communities? Unsheltered, undocumented folks, disabled folks, immunocompromised, which is really important in this era of COVID, from the severe impacts of climate change, power outages, and other disasters.
Right. So one of the things that I talked about is creating a rainy day fund or a weather fund that essentially gives resources to people who are impacted, right? So in my neighborhood, we have some of the worst air quality in the city of Sacramento and Oak Park, right? And that's impacting people every single day, right? And so we've installed air quality monitors, but one thing that we need to be doing is figuring out, once we have that data, how do we utilize that data to make things better, right? And part of the problem is the freeway system that's right here, right? And so I think I'm really interested in looking at ways that we can reduce those impacts, that we can build up walls that maybe one day that it won't exist anymore. I'm very interested in looking at that in the future. I don't think that there's a reality where we need to have large freeways that are running through our cities. There might be ways for us to build over them and to produce more barriers. So I think we just need to be focusing on the things that are impacting those residents the most. I think about also unhoused folks, right? Like they are constantly, when we had the fires that were raging through the city and the county were putting out statements saying, stay inside, wear a mask. Where do you stay inside if you're unhoused? How do you get access to a mask if we're not providing them? So I want to see more urgency at the city level to treat people who are on the streets like human beings and to provide resources when they're not available. Like, why couldn't we have opened up buildings and put people in them to hide from the smoke? Why can't we do things now to keep people off the streets so that they're not suffering from the impacts of the air quality and by climate change? And just kind of the last note, like right now, most of the shelters and services that are being provided to unhoused folks are underneath the freeways. And that's a place that we know are severely impacted by the air quality. So I think being really focused on people and what they need over what it might cost us is going to be a key for me. I hope that answers the question.
I think it answers it adequately enough. Thank you so much. So tangentially related, you have mentioned how you have dealt with housing insecurity, and that you live in Oak Park, which is one of the neighborhoods hit most by gentrification. And many neighborhoods in your district, District 5, are rapidly gentrifying, forcing longtime Black and Brown residents out who have, like I said, lived there for a long time. How would you use your position to address this gentrification?
Yeah, and that's the number one issue, by the way, as I knock on doors in my neighborhood. And understandably, there are people who've lived in this neighborhood for 30 plus years for generations that are now not able to afford to live there. And they're getting pushed out to places. Sacramento's housing crisis is out of control. And so I'm really focused on tenant protections, keeping people in their homes, allowing people to stay in. I'm also really focused on ways that we can use things like community land trusts to keep prices down. So actually having these nonprofit land trusts own the land, keep prices stable over time, and build affordable housing on them. And also I'm interested in opportunities for increasing home ownership. So, you know, in Sacramento, we see very low home ownership rates for certain groups of people, including Black folks in Oak Park. Like, why are we not creating programs for people to pay down payments on houses? Like, we're putting so much of our money towards rent to someone. Why not allow someone to have the opportunity to buy? So option to buy, right to buy, tenant protections to keep people in place. And then we just really need to be rapidly building affordable housing. I believe in publicly subsidized affordable housing. I believe that the city and the county should be in the business of building it. We need to do it soon, because the reason why we're in this mess is we don't have enough supply, and we certainly don't have enough supply of affordable housing projects. So I'm going to be really focused on protecting people, keeping them in their homes. Like, I'm not afraid to use my position to go and do a press conference to help someone stay in their home if they're getting evicted unjustly. And then making sure that we have the protections that we need to keep tenants in their place. So it's a huge, huge issue.
That's really great to hear. I'm involved in the housing fight as well, and it's good to hear your support for all those things. There are many barriers that people face to engage in civic participation. You mentioned city or public budgeting. I'm perhaps using the term wrong there. But yeah, just having their voices heard in city council in general can be difficult due to a whole variety of issues. Do you support the People's Budget campaign for participatory budgeting?
I do.
Excellent. That was the word I was looking for, participatory.
Yeah.
Beyond just participatory budgeting, how would you work to make city council more accessible to all of your constituents, especially those experiencing structural barriers?
Yeah, so this is something I think about a lot. In particular, during the pandemic, we moved city council meetings to Zoom. I think about how many people have been franchised and able to actually participate that weren't before. You know, many times when I've gone to city council meetings over the years, when I was working, 2+ jobs and trying to, like keep a roof over my head. And I can even imagine people who have families who are trying to take care of their families. You have to go drive to City Hall, find a place to park, pay for parking, sit in a room for 2, 3, 4 hours just to speak for 2 minutes and not even have someone respond to you directly. That's not only demoralizing, it doesn't make any sense. And also it requires people to get in vehicles, right? Which is not good for the environment. And we have seen that Zoom and call-in features can be a really effective option for people. I can be making dinner over here and multitasking and then get on to speak my 2 minutes and then move on. So I would like to push to keep a Zoom option for folks moving forward into the future. I also think that we need to have city council meetings that are at times that make sense for people. So in the last, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago when they passed a measure, they changed it to make it from only evening time to having daytime ones now. I think that that's a challenge for a lot of people. So being conscious about how people can participate is important. I'm all about making it easier, because I think more public participation in the process it only makes us better, whether that's the budget, whether that's actually showing up to city council meetings. I also believe that the city should have more opportunities for like workshops and engagement where they're transparent about how they share information. One of the most frustrating things in the world is when you show up to City Hall and you're like, I'm having this huge issue, and they say thank you for your comments, and then they move on and you never get responded to. So at least from my office, I commit to responding to people directly, whether it's after the meeting and following up, because I think you need to not only be heard, you need to have a solution to your problem. So I hope that answers it.
It does. For the most part. I have a follow-up question, but I do want to do a time check. We only have 2 minutes left. And then we have some spillover time where we're going to take a little bit of a break between the next candidate. So it's a little bit of a cushion, but this follow-up that I like to ask you, if you could finish it in those next 2 minutes. So you specifically mentioned the Zoom meeting, which definitely opens up the participation for people who cannot get there physically. What and you might have already said this, but if you could expand a little bit on it, how would you deal with folks who are houseless or who lack internet access to, say, access that Zoom meeting?
Yeah, so I am a proponent for allowing internet access across the whole city. This is something that the mayor actually has brought up in the past and did a big press release around, and I don't think it's actually happened, and that was a few years ago. We need to have public access to broadband, period. But that doesn't really matter if you don't have a place to charge your phone, for example, or if you don't have a phone. And so I'm also really supportive of transportation for folks, right? And then if the ultimate goal is to get people off the streets and into places, whether it's our primary goal is housing, but if you're in a shelter, if you're in somewhere else, we need to have ability for people to access in those places as well. So having access to charging stations, having access to the internet as well. But at the end of the day, like right as it stands right now, it's almost impossible for you to access if you're living on the streets. So I would support transportation to City Hall as long as there are public meetings in place.
Fantastic. Well, we have reached our time. Thank you so much for taking the time, Caity. It's been really wonderful to talk to you and hear all about yourself and how you feel about local government.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, and I also appreciate you educating me as well. So I've got some reading on my list, and I appreciate all of your time. Thank you.
Thank you again so much.